He never mentioned her name at dinner, not once in 42 years of marriage, and yet every month, like clockwork, Gerald would write out a check to Eel and drop it into the blue mailbox outside the grocery store. Rain or shine. I asked once, only once, early in our marriage. "She's my cousin," he said. "Sickly thing needs help." Then he kissed my forehead like I was a child and told me not to worry my sweet little head. I never brought it up again. I should have. But when you've built a life on routines, on his way of doing things, you stop looking for questions he doesn't want answered. You just make the meatloaf, iron his shirts, and let him have his secrets. When he died last spring quietly in his sleep with the TV still playing some late-night war documentary, I thought that would be the end of it of her. I even paused, staring at the checkbook on his desk, wondering if I should let that be the one thing I let go of. But habit is a cruel master. The next month I sent the check. The month after that, too. Then came the envelope. It arrived on a Monday, same as always. I was sorting bills at the kitchen table, trying to decide whether to fix the leaky faucet or finally replace the upstairs curtains. The envelope was thick, expensive, handwritten, and addressed not to Gerald, but to me, Mrs. Ruth Lancaster, in slanted, elegant script. Inside was a thank you card, not printed, not formal, written in the same hand. "I'm so sorry to hear of Gerald's passing. He was always kind, always generous. The money helped more than I can ever say. Thank you for continuing the support. You didn't have to. I hope one day you might come visit. The house is open to you any time. Eleanor L. Briar Hill, Ashford County." That name again. I stared at the card so long my tea went cold. Then I read it again. Ashford County, a 6-hour drive from my little town in Camden. I'd never been. Gerald went often. Fishing, he'd say. Quiet place, Briar Hill. I looked it up on the computer my granddaughter had forced on me for Christmas. It took me longer than I'll admit to type in the name, but eventually there it was. A small rural county, yes. But Briar Hill wasn't small. It was a gated community. Not just any gated community. It had its own golf course, private lake, guards at the entrance. You don't end up in Briar Hill on Social Security and sick days. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing Gerald's voice in my head, warm and casual. "Don't worry, your sweet little head." Well, it was mine now, wasn't it? The money, the silence, the right to ask. So, I packed an overnight bag, left a note on the fridge for my neighbor, and got into my sedan. The same one Gerald refused to trade in, even when the brakes squealed like a child in church. I didn't care. It was mine now. I drove through 3 counties before I let the anger settle at first. It was just confusion, then curiosity. But by the time the Briar Hill gates came into view, tall, white, guarded, I felt something else entirely, a kind of rising heat in the chest I hadn't felt since I was 23 and pregnant. And Gerald came home drunk with lipstick on his collar. I gave the guard my name. He hesitated. I showed him the card. He nodded. "She's expecting you." Of course she was. The driveway was long and curved, flanked with hedges trimmed like wedding cakes. The house, no, the mansion, rose at the top like a proud old swan. 3 stories, wrap-around porch columns like something out of a southern novel. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment gripping the steering wheel. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from shame, because somewhere deep inside me I'd known. Not the details, but something. You always know when something's been kept from you long enough. The front door opened. A woman stepped out. She wore white linen slacks and a pale blue blouse. Her hair was perfect, her skin tan. She looked not sick, not frail, but radiant. "Ruth," she said, smiling like we were old friends. "I was hoping you'd come." I stood up slowly, the gravel crunching under my feet. "You must be Eleanor," I said. She nodded, stepping aside to let me in. And as I crossed that threshold, I realized I wasn't here to visit. I was here for answers. The floor was marble, not fox tile, real marble, the kind that cools your soles, even through thick shoes. The foyer opened into a vast living room with floor-to-ceiling windows and pale furniture that looked untouched by time or toddlers. Everything smelled of fresh flowers and money. Eleanor led me in like I was a welcome guest. "Would you like tea or something stronger?" I didn't answer right away. I was taking it all in. The chandelier, the artwork, real oil paintings, not prints, the baby grand piano in the corner. I'd spent my life vacuuming crumbs off a fabric couch from Sears. This felt like a movie set. "Tea will do," I said eventually. Though what I really wanted was whiskey. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone in that cathedral of a room. I didn't sit. I looked, really looked. A picture frame caught my eye. Silver, polished, on the table next to a leather-bound book. I picked it up. It was Gerald, young, maybe 50, in a collared shirt. I didn't recognize one arm around Eleanor's waist. They were smiling at something off camera, natural, comfortable, like husband and wife. My chest tightened, but I placed the frame back exactly where it had been. No scene, Not yet. Eleanor returned carrying a tray with 2 cups and a tiny porcelain teapot. Everything matched. Of course it did. She poured with grace as if we'd done this before. As if this wasn't the first time his widow was sitting in the home of his whatever she was. I suppose I said, taking the cup. You knew he died. Her smile faltered. Yes. I heard a few weeks after a friend in town saw the obituary. A friend. Small world. I took a sip. Earl Grey. Strong. No sugar offered. You didn't come to the funeral. She stirred her own tea, though she hadn't added anything. I thought it might be inappropriate. Inappropriate, I repeated, considering. Eleanor sat back in the armchair, crossing one leg over the other. Her nails were manicured. Her shoes cost more than my winter coat. What would you like to know, Ruth? She didn't sound defensive. She sounded ready, like she'd rehearsed this moment for years. Who you are, what this place is, and why my husband sent you money for half his life. She nodded slowly as if ticking off a checklist. Fair questions. I'm not here to cause trouble, I added. I buried him. I did everything right. But I won't be lied to. I never lied, she said. Not to you. You let me believe you were sick. I never told him to say that. I looked at her. Really? Look, how long? A pause. 27 years. My fingers gripped the teacup harder than I meant to. So you were lovers. We were friends, she said. At first I didn't want to hear more, but I had to. He told me you were his cousin. Her lips twitched distantly. Technically that's not untrue. Technically. I set the cup down. Did you love him? Eleanor's eyes didn't flinch. I did, but not in the way you think. He loved you, Ruth. He never stopped saying that. I laughed then. A small sharp thing. He said that while handing over our savings. It wasn't your savings. Now I flinched. Eleanor softened. I'm sorry, that was cruel, but Gerald was always clear. He gave what he wanted to give. I didn't ask. What did he give? She hesitated. Money, advice, help with the house. This house was my mother's. He helped restore it. I was going through a divorce when we reconnected. We knew each other as children. He was kind to me back then and kinder when we met again later. I swallowed hard. And you took his money. She looked at me, then really looked. I didn't take anything he didn't offer. I never expected it to continue as long as it did. But it did. Yes, I stood up. My knees cracked, but I didn't care. I thought he was generous, I said. I thought he was noble for helping a cousin in need. I worked overtime to make up for the checks. I gave up vacations. I fixed our roof with a ladder and duct tape while he sent you thousands. I never meant to take anything from you. But you did. Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Then she said, would you like to see something? No, but I followed her anyway. She led me down a hallway lined with photos, none of Gerald, and into a small office. Dark wood, shelves lined with books I'd never read. She opened a drawer and handed me a folder. Inside were copies of checks, dozens, all signed by him, all made out to her. Some were small, others staggeringly large. That's just the last 10 years, she said. I flipped through them. My hands didn't tremble. They burned. He told me once, Eleanor added, that he admired how you never asked questions. I looked up. He said you trusted him more than anyone else ever had. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just asked, did you ever send a thank you? Eleanor hesitated. Not to you. Not until after. I closed the folder. This house, I said. All of this was built with my husband's money. She didn't deny it. I walked out without another word. I didn't cry until I hit the freeway. Not at the mansion. Not when she handed me the folder. Not when I passed the framed photo of my husband smiling like he belonged there, like I'd only been the pause between his lives. But somewhere between Ashford County and the old road back to Camden, I had to pull over. I parked beneath a faded billboard for a diner that probably closed a decade ago, turned off the engine, and let it all rise. Not loud, not messy, just a steady stream of tears soaking the collar of my cardigan. My hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from floating off into some place where nothing made sense. 27 years I'd been cooking his meals while he spent weekends fishing. I'd packed his overnight bags. I'd covered the short months when money was tight. Thinking we were in it together, I let the engine run once I calmed down, let the air blow warm. Thought of turning back, not to the mansion but to her, to Eleanor, if he ever brought her flowers, if he held her hand the way he used to hold mine. Thumb brushing the space between my knuckles like a secret only we shared. But I didn't need those answers. They were all the same. I wasn't enough. Or I was enough to come home to, but not to stay fully with. Not when something freer, quieter waited a few hours away. I got home just after dusk. My porch light was already on, set to the timer. I never learned how to change. The neighbor kid had brought in the mail like I asked, and my house looked the same as I'd left it, quiet, sensible, tired. I walked in, dropped my bag and didn't bother with dinner. I sat down at Gerald's desk instead. The checkbook was there just as I'd left it. A clean ledger, every payment to cataloged like clockwork. I flipped back a decade, same timing, some notes in his shorthand, 4 groceries, 6 medical, 12 renovation. Like he'd needed to convince himself or me. Then I opened the drawer. I'd never gone through it, not even after he died. Something about the way Gerald kept things made me feel like I'd be invading, as if even in death he'd know. But I'd earned the right now, so I opened it. Inside envelopes, some empty, receipts for oil changes, a few retirement notices, a faded snapshot of a dog I didn't recognize, and at the very back, a small fireproof box locked. I almost laughed. Of course, I took it to the kitchen, rummaged through the drawer where I kept old batteries and expired coupons, and found Gerald's little ring of keys. The third one fit inside the box. More receipts, older, a notarized document naming him as co-signer on a property in Ashford County. The same address. He hadn't just helped Eleanor, he had invested in her. There was also a manila envelope. I opened it expecting more bank records. Instead, there was a letter handwritten his. Ruth, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I imagine you know everything by now or enough to hate me. I never wanted to hurt you. I know that's a tired thing to say after a betrayal, but it's the truth. I loved you. I still do. You were my anchor, my home. Eleanor was something else, a tether to another version of myself. The boy who always wanted to be more than he ended up being. She never needed me to be strong, just present, and I was on weekends in letters in ways that don't excuse anything. But you should know this. I never gave her what was yours. Every cent came from the savings I kept separate from the second job you never asked about, from dividends from things I didn't tell you about because I knew you'd want to share the burden. You carried too much, Ruth, and I let you. That's on me. The money left in my name is yours. Do with it what you will. I trust you'll use it better than I ever did. And if you ever find it in yourself to forgive me, I hope it's not because I deserve it, but because you need peace more than I need absolution, Gerald. I read the letter twice, then a third time. Then I folded it and placed it back in the envelope. He thought this was noble, that by keeping the money separate, he hadn't really betrayed me. As if betrayal were measured in dollars. What he hadn't understood, and maybe never would, was that it was never about the money. It was about all the years I spent believing I was seen, that my steadiness, my reliability were worth something more than background music to his other life. I sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. Then I reached for the phone and called the lawyer. Mr. Halberd, I said when he answered, I need to go over my husband's estate again tomorrow if possible. Of course, Mrs. Lancaster, is everything all right? No, I said, but it will be. The lawyer's office still smelled like stale coffee and furniture polish. Gerald never liked Mr. Hilliard. Said he was too slick, but slickness, I'd learned, wasn't the worst quality in a man. It meant he paid attention, and I needed someone who paid attention. Mrs. Lancaster, he said, rising to shake my hand. I'm so sorry again for your loss. Thank you, I replied, sitting down. But I didn't come for condolences. I came for clarity. He blinked at that. Of course, how can I help? You said before that Gerald's assets were pretty straightforward. I want to go over them again carefully this time. He nodded, pulling out a thick folder with my husband's name on the tab. Let's see. There's the joint checking account, the retirement fund, a small investment portfolio, modest growth, mostly low-risk stocks, and then there's the separate account. What separate account? Halbert tilted his head. You weren't aware. I am now, I said flatly. He opened a new folder. It's in Gerald's name only. Established in 1997. Funded irregularly, usually after dividends from certain stocks. Most of the withdrawals are wire transfers. Same recipient each time. I assumed you knew. I didn't. He hesitated. Would you like to see the ledger? Yes. He turned the folder so I could read it. Line after line, the same name. Eleanor L. routing numbers, amounts, dates, notes like private assistance and discretion advised. I kept my face still, but my fingers curled slightly on the edge of the desk. There's over 300,000 in total sent over the years, Halbert said gently. He kept meticulous records. I bet he did. He left the remaining balance, about 84,000, to you. I looked up just that account.
Yes.
What about the rest? The joint account is now yours by survivorship, the investment portfolio as well. All told, you have access to just under 290,000. I sat with that number for a moment, not because of its size, though it was more than I expected, but because of what it represented. He had prepared, planned, accounted for everything except my reaction. I want to make some changes, I said finally, to my will, to how the money's managed. Of course. Do you have something in mind? I want to establish a trust, I said. Irrevocable for one person. And who would that be? My granddaughter. June, he nodded, already jotting notes. How much would you like to allocate? All of it? I said. Halberd looked up. All of it? Yes. Every cent I can reasonably spare without putting myself in the poorhouse. I'll keep what I need to live. The rest goes to her with terms. What kind of terms? No access until she turns 30, not a penny, and only if she finishes her degree. If she doesn't, it converts to a scholarship fund in her name for girls from working families. He nodded again, a little slower this time. I can draw that up. I want it airtight. It will be. I leaned back in the chair. And one more thing. Can you find out if a certain property in Ashford County is still jointly owned? Which property? I handed him the address I'd copied from Gerald's papers. He scanned it, then typed into his computer. After a moment he raised an eyebrow. Well, he said, it appears your husband's name is still on the deed along with an L. Elaine or L. Jenkins. Jenkins. So she wasn't using her maiden name. I want to know if it's legally possible for me to claim his share. I said you can, but it'll be complicated. If it's joint tenancy with right of survivorship, the property reverts to her. But if it's tenny in common, then I can force a sale. He blinked. Yes, you could find out which it is. He gave a slow, cautious smile. You're not the grieving widow I expected, Mrs. Lancaster. No, I said, standing. I'm not. When I got home I took out the old photo albums. June would visit the next day and I wanted to be ready. There she was in a faded picture from her 6th birthday, frosting on her cheeks, sitting in my lap with the paper crown I'd made from recycled wrapping. The only person in the whole damn family who ever asked how I was before asking for something else. She was why I wouldn't sink, why I wouldn't become bitter or broken or small. I would rebuild on my own terms. Not for Gerald, not for Eleanor, for me, and for the girl who still called me grandma with both arms around my waist. June arrived on Sunday morning with a pie she'd made herself. It was slightly overbaked and the crust was lopsided, but I'd never tasted anything sweeter. I used your recipe, she said, placing it on the counter with the kind of pride only 20-year-olds carry, eager to prove they're grown, but still craving praise from someone who remembers when they couldn't tie their shoes. I can tell, I said, and meant it. She poured the tea while I sliced the pie. She always did that. Small, quiet things that meant more than grand gestures. Wiping the counter without asking, refilling my bird feeder when she visited, asking how I was and waiting for the answer. So, she said after the first bite, what's going on? I looked at her across the table. The sunlight caught the gold in her eyes. She had her mother's mouth, but none of her coldness. June had warmth, the kind of warmth you can't fake, and you certainly can't inherit from people who never learned how to love without conditions. Your grandfather, I began. Left some things behind, she nodded. I figured you've been quiet. Not things like clocks or coins. Other things, secrets. She set her fork down gently. Do you want to talk about them? I think I do. I said, I think I need to. I told her, not everything, not yet, but enough about the checks, the mansion, the woman with perfect hair and perfect lies, the folder of transfers, the letter in Gerald's hand, so calm and neat, you'd think it was a grocery list and not a final confession. June listened without interrupting, without gasping, just with eyes that saw me, not the version of me that baked cookies and gave rides to piano recital, but the woman I was before all that, and the one I was becoming again. Are you okay? She asked softly when I finished. I'm angry, I said, but I'm not broken. She reached across the table and took my hand. I'm proud of you. It was the strangest thing. I'd lived long enough to hear it from teachers, neighbors, church women, but I'd never heard it from someone who mattered like she did. I need to ask you something. I said anything. I'm setting up a trust for you. Not now. When you're older, when you finished school. Her eyes widened. Grandma, don't interrupt. Let me say this while I've got the courage. She nodded, lips pressed tight. I'm not doing it because I think you need help. I'm doing it because I want you to have choices, the kind I never had, the kind I thought I'd built with Gerald until I found out how wrong I was. She blinked quickly and I saw tears forming, though she was too proud to let them fall. I don't know how much it'll end up being, I continued, but it'll be something and it'll be yours. Why me? She whispered. You know why? She looked down. Because I didn't walk away. Because you saw me, even when your parents didn't, even when your grandfather didn't. We sat like that for a while, her hand in mine. Then she said, do you need help with any of it? Paperwork, I mean, or the trust or confronting anyone? I smiled. I've got a lawyer. Do you trust him? No, I said, but I trust me. Later that afternoon, after she left, I stood at the dining room window and watched the wind knock the last leaves from the old maple. The branches swayed and bent and gave way, but they never broke. Neither would I. I pulled out the envelope with Gerald's letter again. Read it one more time. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see the moment he tried. Too late, too little to be honest. You carried too much, Ruth, and I let you. He was right. I had my whole life I'd carried groceries, pain, burdens, silence. I had carried his shame so he didn't have to. But not anymore. Tomorrow I'd call Hallard and confirm the trust, the terms, the account, and then I'd call Ashford County, not Eleanor, the clerk's office, to file the paperwork that would force a sale of the house she thought was hers. Because I might not have been the woman he built a mansion with, but I was the one who would finish what he started and make sure it meant something real. The Ashford County clerk's office was polite, efficient, and utterly unprepared for a 73-year-old woman who didn't want small talk. "Yes, I have the deed number," I told the young man at the counter. "No, I'm not here to contest it. I'm here to claim what's mine." He blinked, glanced at my driver's license, then typed something into his computer. "It appears your late husband was listed as a co-owner, tenny in common, not joint. Which means," I said, though I already knew, "which means his portion of the property now belongs to his estate," he said, still frowning. "To you, exactly," I said. "So, let's talk about the partition process." He looked like he'd never heard those words from a woman in orthopedic shoes. "Mom, are you sure you want to file a partition action? That would force a sale of the entire property unless the co-owner buys you out." "Yes," I said. "That's the idea." He cleared his throat, printed a form, and handed me a pen. "Would you like legal counsel before filing?" "I have it," I said, scrawling my name across the bottom with a hand steadier than it had any right to be. When I returned home, I called Hallard. "She'll receive notice within 10 business days," he said. "After that, she has 30 to respond. And if she doesn't, then we proceed to court. It won't be quick, but the law is on your side." I sat back in my chair and let that settle. All these years I'd let the silence sit like a stone in my chest. I'd let Gerald dictate the shape of our life. Even after death, but now, piece by piece, I was taking it back. That night I didn't sleep, not out of worry, out of clarity. My thoughts were sharp, clean. And when the sun rose, I made coffee, toasted half a bagel, and opened the folder where I kept the trust documents. It was done, signed, notarized, funded. June would have something that no one could touch. At 10:00 the phone rang. I recognized the number. Ashford County. "Eleanor." I let it ring twice before answering. "Ruth," she said, calm, controlled, still playing hostess. "Eleanor, I received a notice today from your lawyer. I expected you might." Silence for a beat. "I see you've decided to make this formal." "Nothing about this was ever informal, Eleanor," I said. "You do realize what you're doing, don't you? This will be public, messy, I'm aware." She exhaled. "The house is in my name too. I lived there. I restored it. I paid for you paid for the curtains I cut in. He paid for the house. That's not fair." "No," I said, "it isn't. And yet, here we are." "You don't need the money," she said, voice tightening. "Maybe not. But I need the truth to cost you something." Silence again. "You're not angry at me, Ruth," she said eventually. "You're angry at him." I said, "Now I'm just done." She didn't reply. "I'll give you one option," I added. "Buy me out at fair market value, otherwise the house goes on the market. You do that," she whispered. After everything, I said. "Why now?" "Because for the first time in 50 years I can." I ended the call before she could answer. I went to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat at the table with the morning sun warming my back. On the counter sat the pie plate June had returned, washed, dried, not a crumb left. She tucked a little note inside. "Next time I'll try cherry, love you." I held the note in my hand for a long time. Gerald gave away his money, but I would give away something better. A future, one built not on secrets, but on choice. The first letter from Eleanor's attorney arrived a week later. Typed formal, polite to the point of condescension. "Our client, Miss Eleanor L. Jenkins, expresses her intent to resolve this matter amicably and proposes to purchase your client's 50% share of the property at a fair value to be assessed by a neutral appraiser of mutual agreement." I read it twice, then handed it to Hallard without a word. "She's blinking," he said, flipping through the pages. "Trying to avoid court. She doesn't want headlines," I replied. "No," he agreed. "And probably can't afford to buy you out at full market value either. Not without selling something else." I didn't smile, but something close to satisfaction passed through me. "Arrange the appraisal," I said. "You want to accept the offer?" "No," I said. "I want to raise the price." Halbert looked up surprised. "I've done some reading," I said. "There were improvements made to the house with my husband's money. That increases its value. She doesn't get to benefit from his generosity and pretend it wasn't mine, too. You're asking for a higher valuation based on investment history." "Exactly." He tapped his pen against the desk, then nodded. "We can make that argument. She might contest it. I hope she does." When I left the office, the air had changed. It was that late autumn crispness that makes your lungs sting in a good way. The kind that reminds you you're still alive, no matter who tried to erase you. Back home I made soup. Not because I was hungry, but because the act of cutting vegetables and stirring broth grounded me. There's something honest about a meal that takes time. As the onion simmered, I opened the photo drawer. I hadn't done it in years. I found a picture of Gerald and me from our 25th anniversary. He was holding my hand. I remember thinking in that moment how lucky I was to grow old with a man who made promises and kept them. I put the photo back. I didn't need it anymore. That evening, June stopped by again. No pie this time, just her in a red scarf and wind-blown hair, cheeks pink from the cold. "Hi, Gran, come in. I just made soup." She smiled, stepping inside and peeling off her coat. "Smells like home." We sat with steaming bowls between us. She talked about school finals, the way her roommate always left wet towels on the floor. I listened, nodding, laughing in the right places. And then when we were quiet, she said, "I saw the papers on the counter about the house. I didn't mean for you to. I wanted to," she said. "I'm glad you're doing it." "I'm not doing it to punish her," I said. "Not only. I know I'm doing it because I want the story to end with my voice, not silence." June looked down at her spoon, then back at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Staying, not asking questions." I thought about that. "Sometimes," I said, "but mostly I regret thinking I couldn't survive without him." "You could?" "I did." She reached across the table again, the same way she had a week before. Her fingers were cold. "I hope one day I'm as strong as you." I squeezed her hand. "No," I said, "you'll be stronger." When she left, I stood in the doorway and watched her walk to her car, confident, tall, unapologetic. And I thought, that's what all of this is for. Not revenge, not justice, but legacy. The appraisal came back higher than I expected, not just because of the land. Ashford County had gentrified over the last decade with out-of-state investors snatching up historic homes, but because of the renovations, new roof, updated plumbing, high-end fixtures, granite counters in the kitchen, all paid for with money that left my household every month without a word. When Halbert showed me the report, I didn't flinch. Just read each line slowly, like it was the ending to a book I'd always known would hurt. "Her lawyer's going to balk," he said. "They'll claim half of these improvements were hers." "They weren't," I said, "and I have the receipts." Gerald kept everything. Neat folders, itemized, labeled. I used to tease him for it back when I thought it was endearing. Now it was ammunition. "She has two options," I said. "Match the price or lose the house." Halbert looked at me the way people look at someone they underestimated too long. "You sure you don't want to keep it?" he asked. "Rent it out. Use it as leverage, you have that right." "I don't want a piece of his lie," I said. "I want it gone." He nodded, marking a note. "Then let's make her sweat." The response came 3 days later. Eleanor, through her lawyer, requested an extension. More time to secure financing, more time to assess the emotional cost of parting with the home. "She's stalling," Halbert said. "Let her," I replied. "Every day that passes is a day she remembers I'm not going away." I spent the next afternoon in the garden. The roses were nearly gone, but the last few clung stubbornly to their stems as if refusing to surrender to frost. I admired them for that. Then I pulled out the dead ones anyway. I was repotting the bulbs when the phone rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered without looking at the caller ID. "Hello, it's Eleanor." The same smooth voice but thinner now, less air. "I thought we'd agreed to speak through attorneys," I said. "I'm calling as a person," she said, "not a client." I said nothing. "I wanted to ask," she continued, "if you'd come see the house before you force it out from under me." "I've already seen it." "No, I mean come again. Sit with me. Let me explain." "You had 27 years to explain." I wasn't the only one who stayed silent. That stung. Not because it was untrue, but because she said it like we were equals. "I'm not coming for tea, Eleanor." Then come to finish it. No lawyers. Just us. One afternoon, I hesitated, not because I needed answers, because I wanted to see her face when I told her no. "Tomorrow," I said. 300 and... "Thank you," she said quietly. Truly, I didn't thank her back. The next day, I wore the same coat I wore to Gerald's funeral, not out of sentiment, but because it was the last time I pretended I didn't know what I know now. Briar Hill was just as pristine as before. Manicured lawns, columns like polite lies. She opened the door the second I knocked. Eleanor looked different this time, not worse, but thinner, like something had been carved out from behind her eyes. Or maybe I was just seeing clearly now. "Come in," she said. "I made tea." "Of course you did." The living room was unchanged, still magazine ready, but there were boxes in the corner now, half-packed, one open. Inside, a framed picture of her and Gerald. She hadn't even wrapped it. "I assume you got the valuation," I said, not sitting. She nodded. "It's fair." Painfully so. "Then what's this meeting for?" She poured herself tea, but didn't offer any to me. "I wanted you to know I didn't take him from you." I looked at her steady. "You didn't have to. He left on his own." Her hand trembled slightly as she set the cup down. "He used to talk about you. She said you were the smartest person he knew." "Then why did he hide me from you?" "He didn't." She said not really. He used to say Ruth is the backbone. Ruth is why I breathe steady. I felt nothing. Not rage, not pride, just tired. You know what I used to say? I replied. I used to say I trust him, like it was a prayer, like if I said it enough, it would become truth. Eleanor looked down. I'm sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you lost. She flinched. I didn't come here for apologies, I said. I came to say this. I'll give you 1 month to buy me out. Not a day more. And if you can't, I'll sell it myself. I don't care who ends up in this house, as long as it's not someone pretending to mourn the man who lied to both of us. She looked up sharply. You think I didn't love him? I think you loved the version of him who never needed to be held accountable. We stood in silence, the air heavy with what neither of us had said for decades. I hope you use the money for something good, she said finally. I already did. I didn't look back when I walked out of Eleanor's house. I didn't care if she stood at the window watching me leave or if she went straight back to boxing up her past. That chapter had turned. Not with fury, not with vengeance, just finality. Let her sit with that. The next morning Halbert called. She's agreed. He said full buyout at the appraised value, no negotiations. None. She's surrendering the deed. The day fund's clear. I let out a slow breath. Good, she added a note. He added, said she hopes this brings you peace. I almost laughed, not cry, just tiredly. She still thinks this is about peace, I said. What is it about then? I looked out the window. The mailbox stood empty. The street was quiet. Across the way, the neighbors' wind chimes danced soft and directionless. It's about ownership, I said. Not of the house of my life. Later that day, I sat down with a blank notebook, a real one, not the flimsy kind with shopping lists and doctor's appointments, but a cloth-bound book June had given me last Christmas, still untouched. I opened to the first page and wrote 3 words in large, deliberate script. This is mine. Then I wrote out a list, not of tasks, of truths. I stayed because I believed love was measured by loyalty. I mistook silence for strength. I let a man write my story in pencil and never asked to hold the pen. I thought being needed was the same as being valued. I was wrong. I stared at the list until the lines blurred. Then I turned the page and began a new one. This one I titled, What Comes Next? I didn't have all the answers. I didn't even have half. But I had a house that no longer whispered secrets behind its walls. I had money that would never again leave my hands without my permission. I had a granddaughter who didn't flinch when truth came to the table. And I had my name, my full name. Not Mrs. A. Gerald Lancaster, not his Ruth, just Ruth. I decided I'd take a trip, nothing grand, nothing stamped with glossy brochures or airport security, just me, a map and the old sedan he never wanted to trade in. I'd drive until I saw something worth stopping for, a roadside diner, a lake, a used bookstore with cats asleep on the shelves. I'd take my time because for once there was no one waiting with expectations. No dinner to plate by 6, no checks to mail. I mentioned the idea to June when she visited next. Where would you go? She asked, perched on the arm of my recliner, a cup of tea balanced on one knee. Anywhere with pie, I said. And no ghosts, she smiled. You deserve that. I reached for her hand, held it tight. You'll do better, I said. You already are. You did okay too, Grandma. I survived. There's a difference. June looked at me then, not like a child looking up, but like a woman looking across. You didn't just survive, she said. You outlived the lie and you rewrote the end. That night I wrote another page in the notebook, a letter not to Gerald, not to Eleanor, to me. Dear Ruth, you did the best you could with what you knew. And when you knew better, you didn't hide from it. You faced it head on. That's more than most people do. That's more than you were ever taught was allowed. And now you get to begin again, with no one's permission but your own. Keep going. Love, Ruth. I closed the book and for the first time in my life I felt completely unmistakably free. The trip began on a Thursday. I packed light. 1 suitcase, a thermos, a blanket that still smelled faintly of my old gardenia lotion. The kind of things a woman takes when she knows she's not running away, just finally choosing her direction. June stood on the sidewalk as I backed the sedan out of the driveway. She didn't cry. She didn't wave frantically. She just gave me a look I'd never seen on her face before. Admiration that was new. I drove south. No destination, just instinct. The roads narrowed, the trees arched over like old sentinels, and I let the radio play static until I found a station that played Motown like they meant it. I stopped at a diner an hour out of town. It had cracked leather booths and a waitress named Marn, who called everyone darling and served the kind of pie that stuck to your ribs. I sat in the corner alone but not lonely and ate every bite without apology. You traveling to family? Marn asked when she poured more coffee. No, I said. I'm traveling to myself. She smiled like she understood. That night I stayed at a roadside inn. Clean sheets. No frills. I sat on the balcony with a paper cup of tea and watched the stars come out one by one like little truths finally daring to speak. I thought of Elena, of her empty house, her boxed-up memories. I didn't hate her, not anymore. Hate takes energy, and I decided to spend mine on better things. I thought of Gerald too, briefly. Like a scar you press just to check if it still aches. It didn't. On the second day, I found a town with a used bookstore called Dog-Eared Pages. I walked through the stacks for an hour, letting my fingers drift across spines like they were old friends. I bought a book of poetry, not for anyone else, just for me. In the evening, I called June. "How's the road?" she asked. "Honest," I said. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. When I hung up, I realized I hadn't once mentioned Eleanor or Gerald or the house. That was how I knew I was healing. On the third day, I met a woman named Bernice in a motel lobby. She was 81, wore bright green sneakers, and told me she'd been driving cross-country since her husband died 6 years ago. Once I stopped cooking for someone else, I figured I could finally learn what I liked to eat. We had breakfast together. She told me about Arizona, about hot air balloons, about the way loss teaches you things no book ever could. Before we parted, she said, "You're not old, you know. You're just unburdened." I wrote that down. Day 4, I drove to the edge of a lake I couldn't name. There was a little dock and a rowboat tied to the post. I didn't go out in it. I just sat at the edge and watched the ripples stretch across the water like echoes. That night, I wrote again in the notebook. "You didn't waste your life, Ruth. You loved with everything you had. You forgave more than anyone should. And now, finally, you belong to yourself." I stayed one more day and then I drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light clicked on, still set to the old timer. But this time I didn't mind. I'd learned that some routines don't need breaking, just reclaiming. I opened the door, turned on the lamp, and stood for a moment in the quiet. My home, my silence, my future. On the table was a letter handwritten, no return address. I opened it carefully. "Ruth, the deed is yours. The funds have been transferred. I've moved out. You were right, it was never really mine. I hope one day you find peace with all of it. I never meant to steal anything, only to be seen. But maybe that was never mine to ask for. You were stronger than both of us. I see that now. Goodbye, Eleanor." I folded the letter, slid it into the back of the notebook. Didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because peace isn't something someone gives you in a note. It's something you choose when you finally stop asking permission. The first thing I did with the money wasn't extravagant. No trips to Europe, no kitchen remodel, no pearls. I bought a new mailbox. The old one had rusted through at the bottom, letters falling through like nothing wanted to stay. Gerald used to patch it with duct tape. Said it had character. I didn't want character anymore. I wanted something that worked. The new one was matte black with a silver handle and a magnetic latch that clicked shut with finality. I stood on the curb after the installer left and ran my fingers across its clean edge. It was a small thing, but it was mine. After that I made a list, not of what I needed, but what I wanted. New walking shoes, paint for the spare bedroom, a real set of kitchen knives, a weekend at the lake with June. Nothing outrageous, just pieces of a life that no longer belonged to someone else's schedule. I checked off the shoes first, then the knives, both from a catalog delivered in neat boxes with polite invoices that I paid with my own card. Then I tackled the room. The spare bedroom had been Gerald's domain for years, where he kept his war books, his ugly green recliner, his musty-smelling card table, where he played solitaire like it was a duty. I emptied it box by box, not angrily, just thoroughly. Some things I donated, others I tossed. A few I kept, photos mostly, and a pocket watch he'd once said was his father's, though I never saw him wear it. When the room was bare, I opened the windows and let the air move through. Then I painted the walls a soft blue-gray that reminded me of fog on still water. I bought a new bedspread, put up shelves for books, hung a painting of a single open window, the kind that made you feel like you could step through it and keep going forever. That room became mine, for reading, for thinking, for simply being. June came over one evening and walked in without a word, just looking around slowly, hands in her pockets. "You changed it," she said. "I did. I like it. So do I." We had dinner on the porch, leftover stew and cornbread, and talked about her classes, her part-time job at the campus library, the old professor who couldn't figure out how to attach files to email. "You seem different," she said after a while. "How? Lighter, but stronger too. I think that's what happens," I said, "when you finally put things down." The next morning, I received a letter from the Historical Society in Ashford County. Someone had nominated Gerald for inclusion in a book about local war veterans. They wanted my permission to include a photo, a brief biography. I sat with the letter for a long time. He had served, yes, but he'd also deceived, betrayed, Left 2 women clinging to the same name, hoping they were the real one. I took out a blank piece of stationery, to whom it may concern. Thank you for your interest in honoring Gerald Lancaster. He served with dignity and came home in one piece, a rare gift. But I must decline your request not out of spite, but out of truth. Some stories do not belong in books. Some must stay where they lived, behind closed doors, in quiet kitchens, on the backs of women who held too much for too long. Tell the stories of those who carried that weight. They are worth remembering too. Sincerely, Ruth Lancaster. I sealed the envelope and walked it out to my new mailbox. It clicked shut with that same quiet authority. That evening, I lit a candle in the blue-gray room and read poetry until my eyes blurred. One poem made me stop. I am not what they remember. I am what I rebuilt. I copied that line into my notebook. Underneath I wrote, "Still building." The invitation came from Gerald's son Matthew. A heavy card, thick as a lie, with embossed lettering that smelled like money and aftershave. You are cordially invited to a celebration of life in honor of Gerald Lancaster, hosted by his children, December 5th at the Westmore Country Club. RSVP appreciated. No mention of me, no title, just my name, as if we were distant acquaintances who once stood in the same elevator. I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I'd once imagined in another life that the people he called family would gather around me in his absence, that they'd see what I carried, that they'd thank me. Instead, they threw a party and pretended I was a footnote. I didn't RSVP, I showed up, not in black, not in mourning. I wore a deep burgundy coat June had helped me pick out. Simple, tailored, with buttons that made a clean, sharp sound when I fastened them. It was the kind of coat you wear when you've stopped asking for permission. Westmore was all gold trim and false grandeur, a chandelier in the foyer, staff in matching jackets, walls lined with portraits of men who never had to ask twice. I walked in quietly, heads turned. I didn't look away. Matthew found me near the hors d'oeuvres table, balancing a plate I had no intention of touching. "Ruth," he said, voice tight. "Matthew, I didn't expect you. You invited me." He cleared his throat. "We meant to include you more formally, but you didn't." He shifted. "We just thought maybe you'd want some space." "I have a whole house of space," I said. I came to hear what kind of man he was when no one was watching. Matthew looked uncomfortable. "This is supposed to be a celebration." "Then let's celebrate." I moved past him and took a seat near the back of the room. The speeches began. Polite, polished, predictable. They spoke of Gerald the father, Gerald the soldier, Gerald the hard-working man who sacrificed so much for his family. I didn't flinch. They didn't mention Eleanor. Of course not. They didn't know or didn't want to. They didn't mention me either until the last speaker, a granddaughter I barely knew, said, "Grandpa always said Grandma Ruth was the kindest person he'd ever known." It wasn't much, but it landed like a stone in a still pond. After the applause, the wine flowed, and the room hummed with nostalgia, carefully selected for its palatability. Matthew approached again, glass in hand. "I meant to call after the estate settled," he said, "but it all moved quickly. You got what you wanted." He hesitated. "He didn't leave us much. He left you what he thought you earned." That silenced him. Then he said more softly, "Did he ever talk about us, about me?" I considered that. "He did," I said. "Not as often as you'd hope, and never as often as I hoped." Matthew looked away. "I thought he was proud of me." "He might have been," I said, "but he wasn't generous with praise or truth. He was hard to love." "So was I said. "For a long time, I just hid it better." He looked at me then, not as an old woman, not as his father's widow, as someone who knew something he'd only just begun to understand. "Do you hate him?" he asked. "No," I said. But I stopped protecting him. That answer seemed to sit heavy between us. He didn't press further. "Take care of yourself," I said, already turning to leave. "You too," he said, barely above a whisper. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky stretched wide and gray, and I pulled the coat tighter around my shoulders. I didn't cry, not because I was cold, not because I was angry, because I was free. Back home, I poured a glass of water, sat in my blue-gray room, and wrote in the notebook again. They gathered to remember him. I came to remember myself. They told stories with clean edges. I carry the whole thing. I don't belong to his legacy. I built my own. The auction was held on a bright Saturday morning. Clear skies above and stiff wind at ground level. The kind that stings your eyes even when you don't feel like crying. Ashford County Courthouse. Marble steps, thin coffee, and a group of interested faces pretending not to notice one another. Some real estate agents, one quiet couple in matching coats. A young man who couldn't have been more than 30 with a notepad and tired eyes. I stood off to the side with Halyard. "Final list price came in higher than we projected," he said. "That last appraisal tipped the scale." "Good," I said. He glanced sideways. "Sure you don't want to keep it? Could be an income property." I don't want rent checks that smell like my husband. He didn't press me after that. The bidding started low like it always does. The auctioneer had the voice of a man used to moving things fast. Cattle, cars, homes, people once imagined they'd die in. The young couple dropped out first. Then the real estate agents began circling each other like sharks in business casual. I watched without blinking. Then quietly, the young man stepped in. He said his number only once, clear, measured. Enough to make the others pause. I looked at him, really looked, thin jacket, hands in his pockets, the face of someone who'd known disappointment but hadn't let it rot him. When the gavel fell, he was still standing. It's his, Halbert said. Good, I said. The man turned, caught my eye, and gave a small nod. Not a thank you, not a bow, just a human acknowledgement. One person to another. That's all I ever wanted. When we finalized the paperwork, I asked to include one stipulation, that he not raise the house for new construction. He agreed, said he liked the bones of it. Later that afternoon, I returned one last time, not to linger, just to see it empty. The door creaked differently without furniture inside. The living room, where Eleanor had served tea with her mouth full of history, now echoed in a way that felt honest. Stripped, I walked from room to room, not to remember, but to erase. In the office, I touched the edge of the desk that once held receipts. In the hallway, I paused at the spot where I'd once seen that photo of her and Gerald, gone now, dustless. Then I went upstairs. The bedroom was empty but clean, windows open, breeze moving the sheer curtains just enough to make the silence gentle. I stood there a moment. Then I said aloud, it's done. Not for closure, for confirmation. Downstairs, I left a single envelope on the mantel, no return address. Inside the original photo I'd taken from Gerald's drawer, him aged 25 in a military jacket smiling. I didn't want it. Let the house keep it. Back in the car, I didn't look back. I drove straight to June's apartment. She answered the door in sweatpants and socks, hair up, face bare. Grandma, I want to take you somewhere now. Yes. She didn't ask questions, just grabbed her coat. We drove 2 hours north to the lake I'd visited on my trip. I showed her the dock, the rowboat, the view. We stood at the edge in silence. Then she said, why here? Because I said, this is where I felt the first stillness that didn't hurt. She slipped her hand into mine. We didn't talk much on the way home, but before she went inside, she turned and asked, are you done now? I said, but I'm whole. Winter came late that year. The cold crept in slow, like someone easing into a room they weren't sure they were welcome in. Frost on the window panes by mid-December. Silence outside, broken only by the snap of tree limbs under their own weight. I spent mornings with coffee and the sound of my own breathing. No television, no radio, just the click of the heat turning on, the kettle hissing. My body, remembering it, still had a rhythm that wasn't built around waiting. I was no longer waiting. Not for answers, not for apologies, not for someone else to decide what mattered. The check from the house sale cleared in full. I wired part of it to the trust, updated the documents with Halliard, then closed the account it came from. No more traces, no more old shadows. June came for Christmas. She brought cinnamon rolls, a mismatched pair of slippers, and a framed photo of the two of us at the lake. I didn't know you were going to smile in that one, she said, shy. You caught me off guard. That's the best kind. We didn't decorate much. Just the little ceramic tree I'd kept since the 70s, still lit with the original colored bulbs. Some of them flickering like they couldn't decide if they wanted to last another year. I've been thinking, June said, pulling her legs up onto the couch, about where things come from, what they cost. I waited. I used to think love was supposed to be easy or obvious, but you loved through silence, through work, through what you didn't say. I looked at her. Her mouth trembled just slightly. I'm sorry you had to. I'm not, I said. Not anymore. Because now I get to say it loud. She nodded. What would you have done differently? Believed myself sooner. About him. No, about me. That night after she left, I wrote the final page in the notebook. I am not the sum of what he gave me or what he took. I am not the quiet. I am the voice that stayed even when it shook. I am Ruth and I was always here. I closed the book, set it on the shelf, lit a candle, and listened to the hush of a house that no longer held anyone's secrets but mine. I didn't expect the last snowfall to move me. It came in late February, sudden and heavy, blanketing the street in silence. The kind of snow that makes everything look cleaner than it is. The kind that erases footprints before anyone notices you were there. I watched it fall from the window of the blue-gray room. My room, the one I made when I stopped waiting for someone to ask me what I needed. Outside, the world slowed. Birds vanished. Lights flickered in neighbor windows. I imagined each house holding its own small truths, some still hidden, some freshly spoken, and mine finally all let out. I made tea and sat with my notebook in my lap, not to write, just to hold it. The pages inside told a story that wasn't about Gerald or Eleanor or even June. It was mine, built not from revenge, but from reclamation. I had given away the house. I had closed the accounts. I had turned a betrayal into a map. What I'd kept was harder to measure. The right to change my mind. The right to be alone without being lonely. The right to tell the truth, not for drama, but for dignity. In March, June graduated early. She wore a simple dress and carried a clutch I once lent her for a school dance. She called to tell me she'd accepted a job in the city, library work, part-time, but steady. "It's not much," she said, voice buzzing through the line. "It's yours," I said. That's enough. I didn't tell her then, but I'd already rewritten the trust. No longer locked behind age or degree. No more ifs or unlesses. She didn't need to prove herself to earn what was already hers. I didn't either. The following week, I mailed out 3 small envelopes, one to the Ashford County Library with a check and a letter. "Use this for books written by women over 70. We have things to say." One to a local shelter, the kind that doesn't get big headlines, just hands and eyes and meals that come quietly. And one to Bernice, the green-sneakered widow I'd met months ago at the motel. I sent her a photo of the lake, a note that read, "You were right. I wasn't old. I was unburdened." Then I stood in the kitchen and baked a pie, cherry this time. June had said she'd try it next. I thought I'd beat her to it. As it cooled, I thought of the women who might read my story one day. Not in newspapers, not on plaques. But here, in these quiet rooms we carry inside us, the ones we rarely unlock. So, if you're reading this, if you've ever felt like the background character in your own life, or waited too long for someone to return your kindness, if you've ever mistaken being quiet for being small, then I want you to know you can start again. You don't have to burn it all down. You don't have to scream. You can repaint a room. You can change your name if only on the inside. You can leave a house or sell it or stand in its hallway one last time and say, "This doesn't own me anymore." You can choose yourself, not selfishly, not loudly, but completely. It's not too late. I was 73 when I learned the difference between being good and being whole, and I'd choose whole every single time, so take your time. Then take your voice back. Then take your name. And if you've made it this far and something inside you whispered, "This is me," write it down. Say it out loud. Tell someone or tell no one. Just don't forget it, not again. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment. Pass it on. Say it out loud. Someone else is waiting to remember who they are too.